Hello and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. I'm your storyteller, James, and I hope you're doing well today. Before we dive into this remarkable tale, let's take a moment to pause. A short, heartfelt prayer for all of us. May peace fill your hearts. May happiness find its way into your life. And may this story bring a spark of light to your day. Now, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Drop a comment and tell me the beautiful corner of the world you're tuning in from. I always enjoy hearing your stories too. Today's story is one of quiet longing, of love that started with distance, and of how a woman's unshakable hope changed everything. It's about patience, heartbreak, and the kind of miracle that arrives when you least expect it. You won't want to miss a moment. So, if you're ready, let's begin. Betty Fort stood beneath the golden canopy of their wedding venue, looking every bit like a radiant goddess. The evening breeze teased the lace-trimmed edges of her veil. Her smooth brown skin glowed under the amber lights. Her wide eyes shimmered with unspoken dreams, and her lips curled into the soft, expectant smile of a woman ready to give her whole heart. As her gaze locked on James Robert, tall, tailored, and composed, her heart stirred with the kind of longing she'd only confessed in whispers to her pillow. Their marriage had been arranged, yes, but Betty believed fate had had a hand in this. She had felt it from the moment they first met. This was meant to be more than convenience. This was the beginning of a grand, passionate love. As they exchanged vows before family and friends, Betty's soul soared with hope. Her mind danced forward to the night ahead, to the joining of hands and hearts and bodies. She'd waited for this, dreamed of it, and now it was here. But when the festivities faded and petals rained around them, something in James's smile began to dim. He wasn't cold but distant, a quiet shift that made her stomach twist. Still, he held her hand with care as they were escorted to the honeymoon suite, and she clung to that gentleness like a promise. Later, as she removed her jewelry before the vanity, heart pounding, nerves tingling, she watched him through the mirror. He looked distracted, burdened, not hungry with desire like she had imagined, but restrained, thoughtful, and then he spoke. "Betty, there's something I need to tell you." The words stilled her breath. Her spine straightened as dread coiled in her stomach. "I'm abstinent. I agreed to this marriage due to family pressure, but I have no desire for physical intimacy." The silence that followed was deafening. The dream she'd carried for months, years, ached as it shattered inside her chest. She sat frozen, satin robe clinging to her skin like a second, trembling soul. Her mind spun. What did this mean? What did she do wrong? Was she being punished for wanting love too deeply? James's voice remained calm, almost apologetic, but his words gave no comfort. And though Betty appreciated honesty, his truth had sliced something vital within her. That night they lay side by side, close in space, but miles apart in spirit. The mattress stretched wide between them like a cold ocean. Betty faced the wall, her back to him, eyes open, heart weeping. She had longed for intimacy, craved touch, hungered for kisses that branded the skin. But instead, there was only silence. And in that silence, something within her quietly broke. The days that followed passed like pages written in fading ink. They smiled, they spoke, they played their roles. But inside, Betty drifted, lost between hope and heartbreak. James was everything she should want: kind, thoughtful, respectful. He never raised his voice, never made her feel small. He brought her tea on rainy days, gave her space when she was tired, listened when she rambled about books and dreams, but he never touched her. Not with longing, not with fire. Each night, she climbed into their bed and curled into her side, aching. Her body was untouched, her desires ignored. She began to fear the mirror, not because she didn't still see her beauty, but because that beauty felt wasted, like fruit ripening in the dark, unseen. And still she smiled. She showed up. She played her part. But inside, she burned. She wondered if she was too much for a man who clearly wanted so little. She wondered if love without passion could survive. Could two people live like this? Legally bound, emotionally polite, but physically estranged. In the quiet moments, over breakfast, during walks, as he handed her a fresh cup of tea, she watched him with searching eyes. He cared. That was clear. But care wasn't enough. She didn't want just care. She wanted connection, craving, the kind of love that breathes through skin, that sighs against a neck, that hums beneath every shared silence. And each time he kissed her forehead instead of her lips, each time his hands brushed hers without trembling, she died a little more inside. Until one night, staring into the dark, Betty whispered to herself, "How long can love survive when passion is only a dream?" And though no answer came, her heart murmured back, the woman James had married was nothing short of stunning. Her smooth brown skin glowed like satin beneath moonlight. Her intricately braided hair shimmered with a grace that mirrored the stars. Her full lips always carried the softest hue, and her expressive eyes, framed by bold brows, told stories without ever saying a word. And yet, despite all this beauty, she found herself pulling away, retreating inward, creating distance between herself and the man she still loved, but could no longer bear to be near without breaking. Every gentle word he spoke, every kind glance, every thoughtful act only deepened the chasm between them. The distance she maintained wasn't born of anger. It was survival. Her way of protecting a heart that had grown too heavy with unfulfilled yearning. But no matter how far she tried to pull herself, the nights betrayed her. In the quiet hours when the world slept, and James's steady breathing filled the room beside her, Betty lay awake, staring at the ceiling with eyes heavy with unshed tears. Her body throbbed, not just with desire, but with the aching need to be seen, touched, cherished. Not as a partner or a companion, but as a woman. A woman craving the sacred intimacy lovers shared. She would run her hands over her belly, her collarbone, her thighs, feeling the warmth of her own skin and wondering why his hands had never lingered there, never traced the places she now touched herself in solitude. And when the tears finally came, she buried them in her pillow, afraid even her sorrow might disturb the serene calm James wore like armor. His calmness, once a comfort, now cut like a blade too smooth to scream from. She thought of the way he brushed past her during the day, laying a hand on her shoulder or the small of her back, and how those fleeting touches set her skin ablaze with longing. But he never stayed, never paused to notice how she leaned into him, never let his hand linger. And that, more than anything, was what tore her apart. Not the absence of touch, but the detachment in it, as if she were something sacred, admired but untouchable, beautiful but distant, desired by the world but not by the man she had given her life to. In the darkest hours, she asked questions she never thought she would. Is something wrong with me? Am I too much? Not enough? She sat in front of the mirror, running her fingers over her own arms and curves. Not to admire, but to mourn. Not because she lacked beauty, but because beauty without acknowledgement had become a quiet burden. Logic whispered that this wasn't her fault, that James had spoken of his abstinence on the very night they wed, that his lack of desire wasn't about her. But her heart wasn't made of logic. It was stitched from fire and dreams, and it burned for a kind of love she had yet to taste. She tried. She masked the cracks, smiled when she could, even if her eyes no longer joined in. But the emptiness between them grew. James, gentle, gracious, seemed unaware, or perhaps too committed to the discipline he held dear. And Betty, torn between guilt and longing, hated herself for the way she wanted, for wishing he might look at her one night not with kindness, but with hunger, for her body, her soul, her everything. She began to linger longer at the mirror before bed, slipping into delicate sleepwear, with silent hope that he might notice her, not just as his wife, but as a woman aching to be loved. But each night passed the same. He read his book, offered her a gentle good night, and turned off his light. And Betty would curl beside him in the silence, her body burning with a flame no one wanted to touch. In those quiet moments, with trembling lips and tear-stained cheeks, she finally allowed herself to whisper the truth. It's not me, it's him. Yet knowing it wasn't her did nothing to ease the ache. The fire still burned, the silence still screamed. And despite all they had tried, Despite the kindness, the wealth, the mutual respect, there remained a hollow space where intimacy should have lived. One morning, light spilled gently through the sheer curtains. Betty stood by the window, silk robe clutched around her, heart pounding. She had spent too many nights rehearsing the words, and now she turned to find James seated at the edge of the bed, scrolling through the news on his tablet. She stepped forward, voice trembling. "James, I want us to try something. Maybe medical help." He looked up, dark eyes steady. A pause stretched between them, long and uncertain. "If it can help us," he said quietly, "let's try." Hope flickered, and so began a journey. Consultations, therapists, soft-spoken doctors with terms like psychological blocks, past trauma, hormonal imbalance. Betty gripped his hand through every session, searching his face for signs of awakening. James answered every question with honesty, calm, courteous, open. He explained that he'd never felt the kind of hunger other men spoke of, but he wanted Betty to be happy. He was willing to try. It was comforting and heartbreaking. For 3 months they followed protocols, held each other, breathed in sync, walked through the structured rituals of therapy. Betty poured every ounce of longing into it. James met each moment with the same unwavering grace, gentle, respectful, but detached. His eyes never lingered too long. His touch never wandered. And each session ended with Betty a little more bruised inside, a little more hollow. When the final appointment came, and the doctor gently confessed that James's abstinence might not be something to heal but to accept, Betty felt her world tilt. James thanked the doctor with warmth, squeezed her hand as they walked out. But Betty felt the absence deeper than ever, because they had tried everything, and the fire she yearned for still had no flame. That night, she lay beside him in that too-quiet room, stared at the ceiling, wondered if desire was something that bloomed only in certain souls. If she had married a man whose soil, no matter how kind, would never grow the passion she needed. She didn't regret trying, didn't blame his kindness, but the weight of it all, of gentle hands that never craved, of soft words that never burned, grew heavier. This wasn't cruelty. This wasn't betrayal. This was a love that felt more like friendship, a home that offered no heat. And so, on a rainy evening, as the sky wept steady tears outside their window, Betty stood alone, pressing her palms to the cool glass. Her reflection stared back, a beautiful woman with eyes dimmed by sorrow, a once vibrant soul slowly unraveling. She turned from the window, knelt by her bed, and folded her hands in prayer. Her voice was a whisper, fragile, breaking. "God, my desires are high, but I love him. I don't want to leave him. Please, do something. Please." And as the storm raged louder outside, the silence inside their room remained unbroken. James, asleep in the next room, knew nothing of the war that raged within the woman who lay beside him. A woman torn between love and longing, between devotion and desire, between a kind man's peace and the wild ache of her heart. Her bed, soaked with the silent tears of countless sleepless nights, seemed to whisper back her pain, mocking her longing and loneliness. She could no longer run from the truth. Her body was ablaze with need, and her heart ached to be loved the way she had always dreamed a marriage should feel. And yet, here she was, kneeling in the dim stillness of night, broken, whispering desperate prayers for change, for a miracle, for something to ignite the spark of passion she knew in her soul was possible. She didn't want to leave James. She didn't want to walk away from the man she had once vowed to love forever. But she could no longer deny the emptiness that gnawed at her spirit. Her desire, once a gentle whisper, had become a silent scream. Though her love for James was pure and steady, it was slowly being suffocated by the absence of intimacy, by the void where connection should have lived. And she couldn't keep pretending it wasn't breaking her, piece by aching piece. She had tried. God knows she had tried. Treatments, therapy, long and honest conversations. But nothing had changed. The gap between them remained, growing wider with every passing day. "I don't know what else to do," she whispered, her voice fragile, dissolving into the dark like shards of broken glass falling to the floor. She didn't want to give up. She didn't want to lose the man she had married, but she also didn't want to live the rest of her life in a marriage without fire. Her soul felt torn between devotion and desire, between patience and passion. As she clung to the last threads of faith, her body shook with sobs too deep for tears. She no longer cried. She simply trembled, grief pouring out of her in waves of silence. She wasn't sure if God was listening. She wasn't sure if her voice reached beyond the walls of her bedroom. But she prayed anyway. Prayed for a miracle, for a shift, for something to awaken between them. She prayed for the kind of love that sets the soul ablaze. Outside, the rain softened into a hush, a gentle whisper on the windowpane. And eventually, drained from the weight of emotion, Betty drifted into a restless sleep, not knowing that somewhere, somehow, her prayer had begun to echo across the universe. 12 months passed. 12 months of silence, of aching nights beside the man she loved, her heart still yearning for more. And still she stayed. Betty remained by James's side, a quiet warrior of love and longing. She had tried to accept her reality, married, cherished, respected, but untouched. She had told herself again and again that love was more than physical connection. And in many ways, it was. James was kind, gentle, and good to her. He made her feel safe. He made her laugh. He cared for her in ways many men would not. In him, she had found a best friend, a devoted companion. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself, she couldn't escape the hollow space in her soul. The part of her that longed to be wanted, to be desired, to be held. That ache never went away. She buried it beneath daily smiles and patient silences. She told herself love was enough, even when her body whispered otherwise each night. She wrapped herself in his tenderness, found comfort in the little moments, shared meals, evening walks, quiet conversations. But the fire inside her never fully dimmed. And then one ordinary evening, everything changed. They were sitting together in the living room, talking like they always did, when she noticed it. The way his gaze lingered, the softness in his eyes so familiar, yet somehow different. The air between them seemed charged, heavy with something unsaid. Her heart skipped. It was subtle, barely there. But it was real. A shift. When he reached out and his fingers brushed hers, the touch was nothing remarkable by most standards. But for her, it was everything. The deliberate way he held her hand, even if just for a moment longer than usual, it sent a jolt through her heart. For the first time, she saw in his eyes what she had yearned for. Longing, desire, the spark she had prayed for. Could this be the miracle? She didn't dare speak. She didn't want to break the fragile tension hanging in the air. But James didn't pull away. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. And in that charged stillness, something awakened between them, something ancient, raw, and utterly real. That night, as moonlight spilled through the curtains and the world outside hushed into sleep, Betty lay beside James with a peace she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know what had changed. She didn't know if it would last. But in her soul, something stirred. Hope. And in the quiet shadows of their bedroom, James stood watching her. For the first time in their marriage, he didn't just admire her. He felt her. Something deep within him had shifted. A flame long buried now flickered to life. He watched the gentle rhythm of her breath, the curve of her lips in sleep, the soft glow of her skin. Her scent enveloped him, familiar, yet suddenly intoxicating. A primal ache pulsed through him, a hunger he'd never allowed himself to feel. With trembling hands, he reached out, brushing her arm lightly. Betty stirred, her eyes opened slowly, and when they met his, she knew. Everything had changed. The heat in his gaze was unmistakable. The man who had always been gentle, reserved, now looked at her like he was starving. For her. She sat up, her breath caught, and in that electric moment, all the years of longing vanished into the hush of desire. She didn't need words. Neither did he. The silence between them was enough. It said everything. And as James stepped closer, the air around them thick with anticipation, Betty felt the impossible. finally become real. The prayer she had whispered through tears, the yearning she had carried for so long, was no longer a dream. It was standing right in front of her, ready to rewrite everything. And neither of them would ever be the same again. The words echoed in her mind like a whispered prophecy, both beautiful and terrifying. Betty stared down at the test in her trembling hands, her breath caught between disbelief and wonder. Tears welled in her eyes, not out of fear, but because something sacred had just taken root inside her. A life, a symbol of the love she and James had found in each other. Their story had already been unexpected. But this was the kind of twist that rewrote everything. For a long moment, she couldn't move. The room around her felt still, like time itself was holding its breath alongside her. Her fingers tightened around the test, the reality sinking in deeper with every heartbeat. A child, their child. Suddenly, everything that had seemed uncertain, all the fear, the hesitation, the quiet insecurities, melted away. In its place, a fierce, unwavering love rose within her. She placed a protective hand over her stomach, her touch tentative, reverent, as though afraid to disturb the miracle growing within. And just like that, she smiled. It was soft at first, barely there, but it grew, blooming across her face with wonder and joy. James, what would he say? How would he react? Would he panic? Would he be afraid? Would he look at her with that same reverence he had that night? Or would this shift something between them? She didn't know. But what she did know was this. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Not in the quiet mornings, not in the uncertain nights. Because she had James. And now, they had a future. A knock echoed from outside the bathroom door, gentle but filled with familiarity. James. Betty? His voice was low, still husky with sleep. You okay? You've been in there a while. She blinked, a breath hitching in her chest as she clutched the test to her chest. The moment was now. Everything would change from here. And yet her heart, it was steady, full. She opened the door slowly. James stood there shirtless, his tousled hair a mess of sleep, his eyes immediately searching hers. Is something wrong? He asked, stepping closer, concern tightening his features. Betty swallowed hard, then slowly held up the test, her hand trembling just slightly. James looked down. Silence stretched between them. Charged, powerful. His eyes lifted to hers, wide, disbelieving. Is that? She nodded. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. I'm pregnant, James. And in that moment, something broke open in his face. Not fear, not confusion, but something raw and overwhelming. Awe. He stepped forward and cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. You're, he whispered, his voice catching. We're going to have a baby? Betty laughed softly, the sound shaky and full of emotion. Yes, we are. James closed his eyes for a second, as though grounding himself in the weight of it all. Then he opened them, eyes gleaming, a smile tugging at his lips that looked like it came from his very soul. I've never wanted anything more. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing he'd ever touched. Like now that he knew she carried both his love and his future, he couldn't bear to let her go. And in that embrace, Betty knew. They had found something eternal. This wasn't just the next chapter. This was the beginning of a new story entirely. Betty could barely breathe as she watched him. This strong, stoic man, now undone by the sight of their children. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, his lips lingering there like a silent vow. She had seen many sides of James, but this tender vulnerability, was the one she would remember forever. The nurses moved gently around them, checking vitals, whispering words of reassurance, but Betty barely noticed. All she could see were the tiny faces before her. All she could feel was the weight of love settling into her chest like sunlight filling a room. We made them, she said softly, awestruck. James chuckled, wiping at his eyes. We really did. And you're incredible, Betty. I watched you bring them into the world, and I've never been more in love with you in my entire life. Her breath caught again, Not from pain, not from exhaustion, but from joy. The kind of joy that steals your words and leaves only tears behind. She reached for his hand and squeezed it, grounding herself in this perfect, overwhelming moment. The babies were gently wrapped and handed back, one by one, their warmth anchoring her to this new reality. Her arms were full, her heart even fuller. And in that quiet, sacred moment, amid the beeping monitors and soft cries, Betty and James became a family of five. They didn't need to speak. Their eyes said everything. Love, gratitude, awe. The road ahead would be wild and messy. There would be sleepless nights, endless diapers, and chaos they couldn't even imagine yet. But right here, in this hospital room filled with newborn cries and quiet tears of joy, everything was perfect. Everything they had ever dreamed of was finally in their arms, and somehow even more than they dared to hope for. Each passing day, they wrote new chapters in a love story that had no ending, only beginnings. Every sunrise brought fresh laughter, new discoveries from their children, and deeper layers of affection between James and Betty. It wasn't always perfect. There were tantrums and teething, long nights and early mornings, but through it all, they remained each other's safe place, their unwavering source of strength. Betty often found herself pausing in the middle of the chaos, watching James chase their toddlers through the grass or rock them to sleep after a nightmare. And in those quiet, everyday miracles, she saw 1,000 reasons to love him more. Their home had become a living, breathing testament to grace, a place built not just on bricks and beams, but on forgiveness, patience, and unshakable faith. James, too, lived in awe of the life they had built. He would often glance at Betty across the dinner table, her hair messy, her eyes a little tired, but her smile radiant as she fed their youngest or kissed a scraped knee. In her, he saw his home, his redemption, his purpose. She had taught him how to love fiercely, how to believe in healing, and how to be the kind of man he had never thought he could become. There were nights long after the children had fallen asleep, when they would dance in the kitchen to the soft hum of old love songs. No music, no audience, just two souls still discovering each other under the same roof where it had all begun. The world outside could be loud, demanding, uncertain, but within those four walls they had carved out something sacred, something eternal. And though time would pass, though their babies would grow, stumble, and soar into their own futures, James and Betty would always return to each other. Through wrinkles and gray hairs, through triumphs and trials, they would hold hands with the same quiet assurance that had once brought them through fire. Because theirs wasn't just a story of falling in love. It was the story of staying there, of choosing each other over and over again. A story of miracles made real, of prayers answered in laughter and lullabies, of a love that wasn't perfect, but was absolutely, irrevocably, and eternally true, and it would last forever.